Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to break down a really powerful concept that might just change the way you tackle, well, pretty much any new goal. It's called lean learning, and it comes from the brilliant mind of author and entrepreneur Pat Flynn. So let's kick things off with this classic zinger from Mark Twain. Why? Because what if our modern obsession with learning more, gathering more data, and watching one more tutorial, what if that's the thing that just ain't so? What if that's the very thing getting us into trouble and holding us back? I mean, let me ask you this. Does this sound familiar? You spend hours, maybe days, binging podcasts, tutorials, and articles. You feel super inspired, right? But then, a week later, you're completely overwhelmed and stuck in the exact same spot. If you're nodding your head right now, you might just be an overlearner. And that really gets to the core of the problem. We are drowning in what you could call inspiration overload. We collect all this knowledge thinking it makes us more prepared, but really, it just paralyzes us. See, we start to confuse that feeling of learning with the actual act of making progress. And trust me, they are not the same thing. So, what's the solution to this very modern problem? Well, believe it or not, the answer is counterintuitive, it's simple, and it's best shown through a story about a group of, get this, 5-year-old design engineers. All right, picture this, a preschool in California. They've got a big problem. A huge ant infestation has taken over, forcing all the kids to eat their lunch outside in the blazing hot sun. Now, their teacher, Miss Jenny, she could have given them a lecture on physics or engineering, but she didn't do that. No, instead, she just got them brainstorming. Every single idea was put on a sticky note and slapped on the wall, from the practical to the totally absurd, like one kid's suggestion to just eat the ants for lunch. Eventually, they landed on an idea. They were going to build their own sunshade with simple stuff their parents donated. And you won't believe it. By the end of that very same day, there it was. A real, functional, 8-foot-tall sunshade built entirely by these little kids. They solved their own problem, right then and there. No committees, no month-long planning sessions. So how in the world did they pull this off when so many of us adults would get stuck? It's because they had a totally different mindset. They weren't paralyzed by feeling like they had to know everything first. They just learned enough to get started, they weren't afraid to experiment, and they just trusted that they could figure out the rest as they went. And this simple, childlike approach, well, that's the foundation for a super powerful framework that you can apply to literally any goal you have, starting a business, learning an instrument, you name it. This right here is the heart of lean learning. It's not about knowing everything. It's about knowing just enough to act. It's about solving the problem that's right in front of your face, not some problem you might have 5 years from now. It is all about learning by doing. Now, this 4-step cycle, it might look almost too simple, right? But that's exactly where its power is. This is a direct weapon against our natural tendency to overthink and overcomplicate things until we just do nothing at all. Okay, so that all sounds great in theory, but how do you actually do it? When you're staring at some huge goal, how do you figure out what that tiny, simple next step even is? Well, Pat Flynn shares a secret weapon he picked up from Tim Ferriss. It's what he calls a keystone question. And it just cuts through all that complexity. Whenever you feel stuck, you just have to ask yourself this question. If this were easy, what would it look like? For example, when Flynn and his partner were inventing their new tripod, the SwitchPod, this question was everything. If prototyping were easy, what would it look like? Well, forget fancy 3D printers, they just used cardboard. If figuring out the size were easy, they drove to a conference and just asked the people who would actually use it. And the result of all these simple, direct actions, they raised over $415,000 on Kickstarter. Incredible. Now, this is where the magic really starts to happen. We're going to see how taking these tiny, easy steps can actually compound over time and lead to massive, almost unbelievable results. The concept is called micro-mastery. See, instead of trying to perfect a whole complex system all at once, you just focus on improving one tiny piece at a time. It's about making a 1% improvement here, then another 1% there.
Let's make this real. Imagine you have a sales funnel. You get 1,000 visitors, and right now it makes one sale for $100. Okay, not bad.
Now, instead of rebuilding the entire thing, you use micro-mastery. You focus on just one email in your sequence, and you double its conversion rate. That's it. Suddenly, from that same exact traffic, you're making $200. Okay, now the next week, you focus on another micro-improvement, your website sign-up form, and you manage to triple its effectiveness. With just those two tiny little changes, that same funnel is now making $600 from the exact same visitors. That is the crazy exponential power of compounding small wins.
And this is why it all matters so much. See, micromastery isn't just about small wins. It's about building this rock-solid foundation of skill and confidence. And that foundation is what prepares you to take those big, bold, game-changing quantum leaps when the perfect opportunity finally shows up.
In the end, after all the frameworks, all the strategies, it all boils down to this. This is the blunt, unfiltered advice that Pat's coach gave him when he was completely trapped in analysis paralysis, with notebooks full of ideas, but zero action. And that brings us to the real takeaway, the most important question of all. What is that one thing you're overlearning right now? What is the smallest, simplest first step, the if this were easy version, that you can take to move from just learning to actually doing? That, right there, is your just freaking get started moment.